Welcome to the 129th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's podium. For over a century, this stage has united visionaries and leaders from politics, business, community, and the arts to share insights on the most pressing issues of our time. And with Canada in a pivotal moment, it's more important than ever that we come together.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. So I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon. I hope you enjoy your lunch, and welcome to those that are joining us online through CanadianClub.org. I'm Martin Basiri, founder and CEO of Passage and director of Canadian Club Toronto, and your host today. In a year where bold fiscal leadership is needed, Budget 2025 put forward a vision of generational investment that will protect and transform our industries, strengthen our economy, and support Canadians. We are so grateful to our sponsor who make this conversation possible. Today's event is presented by Agnico Eagle and TD. Thank you for your support. Event sponsors include Bruce Power and the Vine Growers of Canada. The reception sponsor is CPA Ontario. We are so appreciative of your contribution. To our season sponsor, Canadian Banker Association, thank you. And our official airline sponsor, Air Canada, thank you. And to Canada's First Trust, our nature partner who help us to reduce our carbon footprint by planting smart forests in our neighborhood. We are pleased to welcome a students table from University of Toronto Political Science Department. And also from Rotman School of Management. We thank to Jensen Eng for the support. And now let me take a moment to remind you of our website. All of our future events are going to be on it. We have awesome guests. And please also consider to be a member. Do it today, this afternoon, please. We are appreciated to post about this event on your social media of your choice. And also, I'd like to share your personal views about that. Now, I'm sure you have a lot of questions about federal budget, fiscal priorities, and Canadian economic outlook. Please use the question card in front of you, and you can write, and we will share it with the moderator to ask those questions. For those joining remotely, you can use the Submit a Question button. And now, I'd like to invite Sean Boyd, Chair of the Board of Agnico Eagle Mines, to formally introduce our beloved guests.
Good afternoon, everyone. When I was asked whether I would like to introduce Minister Champagne, the answer was easy, yes, and I was excited to do it because he's a gentleman, he's working hard for Canada, he's extremely experienced, he's in the right place at the right time for us. I didn't know I was going to be introducing a rock star, As I was walking in behind Minister Champagne, it reminded me one time when I had the good fortune of going to a Montreal Canadian Games with Yvonne Cornwallis, and we could not move 5 feet without someone stopping him. So we're in good hands. So on behalf of Agnico Eagle and our colleagues here, it's a great pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker at the Canadian Club of Toronto. It's fitting for Agnico Eagle to be making this introduction today for a number of reasons. Firstly, as I've said, we've gotten to know Minister Champagne over the last few years in his various cabinet posts, and we've found him to be a man of integrity, a tireless champion for Canada and for Canadian industry, both at home and abroad. Secondly, as Canada's largest mining company and one of the largest public companies in Canada, we find ourselves in a very unique position to help our government and Minister Champagne meet the government's objectives to build Canada and make Canada stronger. So by building new mines, by expanding existing mines and opening up new areas for resource development, particularly Canada's far north, which is a focus of this government, we're in a really good position. If we think about the north, we've come to know it over the last 20 years as a region with tremendous opportunity, not just in the resources, but in the people and in the communities that exist there. And the potential of the north is critical to the future of Canada. So it's a region where Agnico's invested $10 billion so far. We have another $2 billion to invest in a project called Hope Bay, which is on Canada's northern coast. And it was almost owned by a foreign government, but our government said, no, we'd like to have it in Canadian hands, which it is now, and it's in good hands. And so we're 25% of Nunavut's economy and looking to invest more there. And the government, and we're glad to see in the budget, there's money set aside for investments in Arctic infrastructure, including housing, and that's going to be important to invest in the community. So the last point, why it's fitting for us to be doing the introduction, we had the opportunity a few weeks ago to talk to the minister and his team before the budget, and we had some good news for the minister. We said, you know, based on our projections, it appears that Agnico will be the 5th largest taxpayer in the country in 2025. We've just rerun our numbers. It's likely going to be the 3rd largest taxpayer in the country next year. So that's a good thing. So along with our skill set, particularly the strength of our relationships in the north, we find ourselves as a company and in an industry and resource development that's well aligned to the country and the country's goals and the opportunities. So they're challenging times, I think we all know that, but we can't lose sight of the fact that it's a great opportunity for Canada, and what we require to take advantage of those opportunities and manage the challenges is strong and experienced leadership. And Minister Champagne, given his extensive experience in foreign affairs, international trade, innovation, science, and industry, he's held a number of key cabinet positions. So with that experience and his international business experience, he's certainly well placed to lead us in his position as Minister of Finance. So today we have the pleasure of hearing more about the budget and the strategy behind it, I think, which is important, directly from the minister. And following the minister and his remarks, we will have Arlene Dickinson, well-known venture capitalist and television star and entrepreneur, conduct an interview and question and answer session. So we've also been told that the minister's remarks today will not exceed the 90 minutes that the minister took to outline to the House of Commons what his plans were, so that's a good thing. So on behalf of Agnico Eagle and on behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I would like to thank Minister Champagne for your commitment to Canada and your commitment to public service to this country, and I would like to invite you to the podium. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Very good. There's a bit of energy in this place, as we should. Sean, you made me smile because what I did in the House was the executive summary of the budget speech. Prime Minister kept keeping pages for my speech, you know. We were in there together, but it's a real pleasure. I just want to say thank you to the leadership. Thank you to Martin. You're the kind of entrepreneur we want to see in Canada. Someone who believes, yeah, big round of applause. You're, I was listening to your words and I was inspired that, you know, in this nation we want hundreds of Martin in our country because you really are the best of the best when it comes to entrepreneurship, the brightest that we have. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you also to the Canadian Club. You always do great events. I don't know if there's so many people. You must have seen champagne on the menu somewhere when you registered. It's good to be with you. And it's always nice. I thought that Arlene Dickinson was the real rock star, but sitting next to the third largest taxpayer in the country, I must tell you, it feels good. Listen, this is a moment in time. This is a moment for Canada to seize the moment. You have seen, obviously, the 2025 budget. This is an investment budget. And I'll just say a few words because, you know, the point is really to have a discussion, take questions, be with you. But first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge all those who serve in this room. There are many of my colleagues who serve in Parliament, either currently or previously. Also, a number of people who are in the provincial legislature, a number of people who serve on the municipal government. Why don't you stand up and we can give you a round of applause to say thank you for your service. There's something about public service that we want to acknowledge, and I hope all of you today, the business leaders, the community leaders, the leaders in Toronto and in Canada, see yourself in this last budget. Évidemment, je veux vous dire merci d'être là en grand nombre aujourd'hui. C'est un grand plaisir de pouvoir être devant le Canadian Club à Toronto. C'est l'endroit par excellence pour parler de finances, pour parler d'investissement, pour parler du budget. But I just want to say four things that maybe frame the conversation we're going to have with Arlene today. There's no doubt that there's a bit of headwind. You know, I think people have felt it at the family table, on the factory floor, in the fields across our nation, and there is a bit of headwind. And Canada is no different. I often say that the speed, scope, and scale of what's happening in the world is quite unprecedented. I mean, some would say you have to go back to 1945. Others would say the fall of the Berlin Wall. Others would say, if you look at geopolitics, the trading relationship, the tariff situation, and technology, whether you're thinking about AI and quantum and cyber, all that together is really a mix that we have not seen, at least. I'm 55, but in our lifetime, it's one of those moments where families are feeling the headwind, and we feel it in many different ways. When you look at that, you say, okay, who has the fiscal capacity to deal with that? You know, one alternative is to retreat and hope for the best. That would be very un-Canadian. And then you look at what Canada can do, and you look at the International Monetary Fund, which single out two countries, not 5, not 10, not 20, two countries in the world from the Director General of the International Monetary Fund, and that was Canada and Germany. Which the director said there's really two countries in the world who have that kind of fiscal capacity in order to meet that moment, which is unique in our generation, to really build the infrastructure, build the country we want. And then you go and you say, okay, how can I build generational investment? And you look at, you know, the kind of things you're going to do that are going to help our country grow. So you look at infrastructure, you look at housing, you look at productivity and competitiveness, and obviously our defense capability, the kind of things that will grow the economy and make sure that we would be prosper for generations to come. At the same time, then tackling affordability, which is the issue that I would say really matters to Canadians. People are thinking about the end of the week, the end of the month. They said, help me today, but at the same time, we understand that with headwinds and fiscal capacity, we need to invest for our future. And lastly, I would say you get credibility and you get confidence from the fact that Canadians have been tightening their belt for quite some time. And they kind of look at us and say, you should do the same in Ottawa. And what I'm glad that with the Prime Minister and my colleagues we were able to do, not only we presented a budget, but we also did an expenditure review in finding 60 billion of saving, which compares very well to what other governments have done before. So when I look at the picture ahead of us, I would say my message to Canadians, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Canada has been more resilient than many had believed. Canada has been adding jobs even recently. Canada is the countries that I would say together, there's a lot for us to do together, but I've never been more confident in our capacity to meet the challenge, to meet the moment, because after all, we're the true North, strong and free. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have a great conversation. Merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. Thank you. Great to be with you.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
With a few friends.
I know, with a couple of our friends. So, Minister, very excited about hearing some of the things you have to say, but this audience in particular sits at that intersection between policy and payroll. You know, they're making everyday decisions about whether they should hire, whether they should build, what they should do in terms of making their businesses stronger, and they do that relying on what they see as the government signals, understanding what the government's going to do, understanding what they can count on for their businesses to be able to make the investments that this budget requires. And so one of the things I want to talk to you today is not about, you know, the budget from a policy perspective, but from a delivery perspective. How are things actually going to happen? So with that in mind, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I have cheat cards, unlike you. You have to just use your head. I'm counting on that, though. I know it's good. So the first one's going to be about sovereignty and affordability, and you just touched on it a little bit already here, but the budget opens with a very strong focus on sovereignty, on defense, and Canada's global standing. But how do you reconcile those urgent priorities with the reality that many Canadians are still struggling with high costs and tariffs? And where in the budget does a household and the everyday Canadian feel some relief?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think it's a good starting point for the discussion today. I mean, if you ask Canadians, and I think you will, I'll often compare it to the G7, because you can look at things in absolute terms, but in relative terms give you a better perspective of where we stand compared to others. But if you look at the G7 countries today, affordability is really what mattered most. If you ask people in the street, and trust me, I get stopped quite often, people would talk about their issues that concern them. And one of them is obviously, I would say foremost, is affordability. So here you come with a tax cut for 22 million Canadians. Here you come with, building more homes, so that, because the affordability issue starts with having a home you can afford. So the kind of thing, the first affordability measure for me is to leave more money in the pocket of people, which we did with the tax cut, then obviously building more homes so people can find a place where they live. And at the same time is that in a world where you may have seen or not in the budget, but it's quite telling, and it's not my chart, I think it's from the International Monetary Fund, but if you look at the uncertainty index, we are higher today than where we were during the financial crisis, and not by a small delta, by a huge margin. So just to tell you the world we live in, where this, I even said, because Canada has the privilege of chairing the G7 this year, and I chair the G7 finance minister, and I was saying in Washington, we cannot let uncertainty become the new certainty. We can't. The world is expecting better from us. And so on one end, you're quite right that we had to find that right balance, delicate balance between tackling the affordability issue, which are day-to-day or week-to-week issue of people, because that really matters to them. At the same time, doing this pivot that will bring our economy stronger for the long term. And I think we gain credibility when we say to households that, we're going to balance our operating budget with our revenues in 3 years, that what we borrow in 3 years from now will be for capital investment, because people understand, you go to the grocery store, you spend, you buy a house, you invest. So the way we presented also, I believe, but you can tell me the budget, which has been applauded by the IMF. Actually, they said other G7 countries should follow Canada in presenting that in terms of giving Canadians a clearer picture of what the government is doing with their tax dollar. And at the same time, in my view, adjusting that to the construction season. I can tell you, I have been minister for a number of years, and I always fought that because it was a bit awkward to have budgets in April or in May when in Canada, the construction season is already pretty much gone or well underway. Doing that in November was even enrolled in Washington as the way to go for other G7 countries, because if you want to build the infrastructure needed, you need to do that at a time where obviously entrepreneurs, builders, and people who are going to be planning for the year will do that. But at the same time, providing more predictability to provinces and municipalities, because as they do their own budget, they need to know where we're going to go. So I think we're putting the country on a much more predictable and stable path in order to do that. And I think we found this right balance. And, you know, I'll tell you something. People have said, Minister, you've used the word generational. And I said I did, and deliberately I did. Because I said you have to compare that. Anything that resembled that, if I go back to my example of Germany and Canada, the largest infrastructure plan in the G7 would be Germany, which is the largest economy in Europe. If you look at the German plan on housing, infrastructure, and defense, if you compare that to us, it's 500 billion euro over 12 years. The Canadian one is 450 billion over 5 years. I think it compares well, and that has been kind of the benchmark if you look at G7 nation to say how you should invest, but where you should invest, because the question is not only how much you borrow, but why. And again, going back to best practices would be if you go in place where you have, the multiples are obviously higher in terms of growth, if you go in infrastructure, if you go in housing and productivity and competitiveness. So I think the budget speaks to everyone in the country. The families, the workers understand, we've been facing headwinds. And if you look at the at this year deficit, 75% of it was for protecting our sovereignty and providing affordability measures at the same time. I mean, Canadians would understand that faced with tariffs, we had to respond. Although 85% of our trade is tariff-free, if you're in Hamilton in the steel industry today, you don't feel like that. If you're in the auto sector in Oshawa or in Windsor, it doesn't feel like that. If you're a canola farmer or if you're in aluminum or the lumber industry, it's very different. So the Canadian way to do is to support our workers, our fellow Canadians at the time of need, to reskill and pivot their industry. And at the same time, defending our sovereignty. That was the piece on sovereignty. And at the same time is affordability, where family have really been saying, give us a break. This is a time where we're feeling it more strongly than before, and therefore leaving money in the pocket of people. So I think Canadians have kind of seen that we understand the issue of today, but at the same time, in the face of headwinds in the global economy, we need to make these pillar investments that are going to provide growth and make sure that Canada succeeds for generations to come.
Yeah, well, I'm not the third largest taxpayer in the country, but I am the largest in my household. And so I think that I care deeply about everything you've just said about affordability. Just moving to, this is largely a business crowd, so I want to talk about the productivity super deduction that you put in place. So that's a really strong signal for manufacturers to invest. But will that process to get that deduction match the urgency of the deduction? I mean, you're asking people to invest, but there's really not a clear line of sight to the approvals and the timelines on it. So tell this group how they can anticipate how quickly they're going to be able to get approvals and what the timeline looks like for that.
Well, that's a very good question. And by the way, this is the financial services hub of the country. So it's good that we talk about that, because you're all going to be ambassadors. My phone is ringing a bit since we announced that, but all of us, I think this is a game changer also for our country. In fact, Canada is going to be the most competitive tax jurisdiction in the G7 for new investments. Not only we benchmark with the United States, but today if you look at, it's going to get a bit technical, but the marginal effective tax rate, Canada is lower than the United States after the one big beautiful bill. We're going to be at 13.6. So this is quite unprecedented, because I understand and you understand that a lot of people have a choice, when they allocate capital. And obviously, we need to be competitive. We have a neighbor at the south, and it was important for us to send a strong signal so that $1 invested now in Canada, from a tax perspective, is more competitive than $1 invested in the United States. So that's step one, because that's for the CFOs and the leaders who are looking at that really matters. The productivity super deduction, listen, this is supercharging growth because you can, immediately expand, if you have plant equipment, technology, R&D investment, AI. I mean, I'm 55, and I think we've been talking about productivity since I can read in this country. We've been saying, what are we going to do? And instead of picking winners and losers, we said, the best way is to have a level playing field, that whoever in this country today wants to do an investment can benefit from that because you are an entrepreneur, Arlene, you would have seen that. If you can immediately expense that, and if you have profit, well, you have cash flow. So it's a very interesting, I would say, engine of growth in the country and making us very competitive in the world because we did that. And I think we were talking, for example, of AI as, a general purpose technology that many would say is akin to electricity in the previous centuries. Now, if you're going to invest in automation, robotization, or even AI on quantum technology, you can expense that. So that is powerful, because making our country more productive and competitive has been of the talk in town for many, many years. So we're doing our part, and I think it's going to really provide this kind of investment attraction, I would say, that people want to see in the country. And I can tell you, since we've been looking at Canada and our competitiveness, I mean, a number of sovereign funds have been knocking on the door and others, because one other thing is that if you look at the world today, stability, predictability in the rule of law is in high demand, and I would say sometimes short supply, depending where you are in the world. So that long-term stability, predictability, tax competitiveness, super deduction there, the fact also that, honestly, when you compare with the G7, a number of my colleagues would like to be in my shoes, I can tell you, because they look at our fiscal position. But look at the pillars of Canada. We're a big magnet for talent. And we just put $1.7 billion to attract the best and brightest in the world to come in our R&D center, to come in our research center, to come in our colleges. We're one of the very few countries in the world that build cars, that build planes, that build ships, that will have the first nuclear modular reactor of the G7 in the world in operation. You have critical minerals, which some would say is akin to oil in the 20th century, because that's key for a number of things that are going to be needed. We have abundance of energy, and that's key, obviously, for growth. And we are the only G7 country with a free trade agreement with all the other G7 nations. So yes, the world is facing some headwind, but when you compare Canada to other nations, not only you have the fiscal capacity, but you have the pillar to sustain that and to build for growth. And that was really the vision, to say this needs to be an investment budget so that we make sure we put Canada on a track for growth for generations to come.
Well, I mean, I can understand why they'd want to be in your shoes, because they're Canadian-made shoes.
Well, indeed, and exactly. Remember the shoes that,
exactly.
that we made? I wanted to send a strong signal, made in Canada, by Canadians, for Canadians, and that's something we need to learn to be more our own best customers.
But to that question, I mean, I think there would be quite a few businesses in this room that would be in the service industry or who are in innovative businesses that aren't yet profitable. How do they participate in that productivity push? Because a lot of, that entire deduction is meant for larger scale, profitable businesses to help them scale even more. What about those service industries and those innovative companies that aren't yet profitable?
Well, there's a couple of things. First, we need to build one Canadian economy. We need to finish the unfinished work of confederation. Whether you sell products or services, you should be able to sell across our nation. I mean, that I think we would all agree as Canadian is something we need to tackle and we need to do fairly rapidly. The second thing I just mentioned is being our own best customers. I mean, it's about time that, when I started in government a few years ago, I remember the mantra was open by default. And I said, what about Canadian by default? What about us being the first customer for entrepreneurs, for our startup? Why not buying Canadian? And, yes, there are rules, but there is way as well. If you look at the world today, you would realize that our partners around the world are looking at domestic companies first. And I think it is quite normal for Canada to change course on that, to say, and it's not only the federal government, and it's great that we're in Toronto. By the way, I would have been here first, but there was something called a vote, and you would understand in these circumstances. Better I was in Ottawa than in Toronto for that day. But one of the things I've said to my provincial colleagues is that we should do that at the provincial level, we should do that at the municipal level, but I really ask for corporate Canada, we should do that also with all Canadian corporates, because if we start to be our own best customers, think about the startup in the room that would benefit from having one of you being their customer. And many people came to me over time and they say, Minister, we don't want a grant. We would just like you to be our customer. Because if you're our customer, then we can go around the world and say, you know, even our own government buys from us. And I think this is kind of, yeah, I think we should, you know, we need to use our balance sheet in a smart way. And the last thing I would say to that, Arlene, and I'll come to SHRED, because I think there's a piece on SHRED I'd like, if you want me, to say, but it's also the defense investment. I mean, you know, if we're going to do these investments, which are going to be very significant, to do our part as NATO, we need to learn from others as well. I mean, a neighbor down south has been using the defense investments for generations to support growth, you know, to support R&D, to support research, to support startups. So for me, I see these defense investments as an engine of growth for the country. And in fact, I've said on a number of occasions, pretty much every Canadian company should have a defense strategy, whether you're selling a product or services, because it's not just Canada. If you look at the G7 country, we were talking about that recently when we were together, and I can remember, but it's like a few trillion that are going to be invested in the foreseeable future. So, you know, that could be a big engine of growth, and for Canada, it's also a moment to build our north, to think about dual-use infrastructure. You think about port, runways, airports. I mean, this is a way for us to really build in a way that we have not seen before. And for the small entrepreneurs, because you're right, the SMEs, you say, what's in it for me? I think the biggest thing we did was to reform SHRED. You know, the SHRED tax credit is used by, I think, out of memory, 62% of small and medium-sized businesses in the country. And it's interesting because people were telling me it's not the amount that we were giving, but it's the process for them to access that was really cumbersome. So I did something which is very unusual. I called a company which has a market cap of a few billions and specialized. I would name them, but I would have to ask them first if they agree, because I've taken that example. But you would know who they are. Their market cap is close to 50 billion, and they've been pretty good at streamlining processes. And I said, if you were to reinvent the process to apply, what would you do? And within 24 hours, they came back with a memo. They said, Minister, this is what we would do. Then we benchmarked with some of our Scandinavian colleagues. And now, if you look at SHRED, you can apply online, you get a pre-approval, and then you do your research. And that is a game changer for people, because what they were saying is that now you're providing certainty. Before, you had to do the research, apply for the tax credit, wait for the audit, and not knowing how much you would get. Today, you will know upfront how much you're getting. This is about, you know, streamlining, removing red tape, and providing the kind of certainty that you say small and medium-sized businesses, they need the certainty before they do that. And I think we reverse that completely to say, we'll give you certainty, then you can start the research and you'll know exactly how much you're going to have in terms of tax credit.
Okay, that's great. I want to get to, you know, one or two of the audience questions, but there's two questions I particularly would like to ask you about. One of them is, you know, trade diversification. I mean, diversification sounds really good on paper, and expanded trade partners are critical. We all know that. But exporters are still facing clogged ports, freight delays, regulatory barriers. What concrete fix is going to land first, and when do you anticipate that is going to ease for people who want to take advantage of the trade relationships that you're forging across the globe?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a very good question, because you're right. I mean, we need to move from reliance to resilience. And then, you know, we've been blessed by geography. So clearly, when you're next to the largest, you know, consumer market in the world, there's kind of a natural attraction towards that. I was just with the governor of Illinois recently, and I said, Governor, if you were a state, you would be part of the G20. His economy is about $1 trillion. So it's kind of natural if you have, like, for example, here you have a $1 trillion economy next to you that you can truck basically anything. There's a natural attraction. But we need to learn from this moment. And I would say nostalgia is not a good strategy. The world is never going to be the same. Every country in the world now needs to pay to access the largest market in the world. And for us, I go back to my example. If you're the only G7 country which has a free trade with all the other G7, you're ahead of the pack. You know, I don't know about you, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't think trade agreements are going to be much in fashion in the coming weeks or years, you know, because the world is going in a very different direction. So you need to use that. We have a trade agreement with Europe, which is giving us access to 500 million consumers. We're focusing now on the Indo-Pacific, and many would say demography is destiny. In a Canadian way, you go where the puck is going to be. So opening these markets is going to be key for Canada. And to your point, that's why we put this infrastructure trade corridor, because you need to remove the bottlenecks. Because people are saying, yeah, but it needs to be more fluid, Minister. And there are so many examples. I spoke to the CEO of CPKC, to CN, and say, what are these bottlenecks in our logistic chains? Because that is going to be key. We want to go from 300 billion to 600 billion of exports overseas. This is ambitious, but it is possible. And I think that's the answer also for small and medium-sized businesses, to say, how can we work with them? We've increased the facilities also at EDC, which has been a great partner for a number of firms to access these new markets. And so those are the kind of things that are going to be helping in a very concrete way people to find new customers. And we need to learn from that moment, because, again, no one can predict with certainty what the world might look like in 5 years from now. But I think that hope is not necessarily the best strategy. You need to just make sure that we organize ourselves in a way to access these markets, be our own best customer, have one Canadian economy, invest in ourselves, and so we will be more resilient to address what may come in the world. And we start from a position of strength. That's why when I said in my remarks, and Sean said that they were a bit longer than you expected, but when I say I believe in Canada, we believe in Canada, because, again, we have what it takes, but I think there's been kind of a moment now that we need to become, make sure we put the house in order so that, we can succeed in this very different world.
Yeah, that makes me think about the interprovincial trade barriers. You talk about one economy, and we talk about customers and exports to other nations and some of the difficulties there. But let's talk about how we're going to take down the interprovincial trade barriers, because one economy means that these business leaders can actually count on being able to move across this country more easily between provinces and be able to trade more effectively between provinces. So are there any specific barriers that you see being removed in the next year in interprovincial trade?
Well, we did our work at the federal level, but there's more to be done, because I think what I've heard from many of you, they said, yeah, but it's a good start, but we need to do more, and then therefore we need to work with provinces and territory to really make it seamless. I mean, you're a great entrepreneur, you've done great things. One of the best things we can be, and I get back to that, is if we want to be our own best customers, that also implies that if you're in Windsor or Kitchener or Waterloo or in Kelowna or in Matane in Quebec, that the goods can freely flow across Canada. And I think that would be, it's not only a gift to ourselves, but it's kind of necessary in light of that. In this world where there's all sorts of barriers to trade, you need to make sure that at least domestically you can do that. And so we will work with provinces and territories. I think it's incumbent upon us. We did our part to remove as many barriers as possible, but I think we need our collective voice to say, now, let's move to the next phase and really finish the work that has been initiated. And I think that would be significant. We've seen the impact on GDP that this could have, and that's going to be, this is work in progress. Like I said, we did our part, but there's more to be done from our provincial colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, and my last question before I go to the audience questions is going to be around, when you think about what's going on with barriers and all the things, and you've made the budget has many good things in it with a lot of ambition. And this is kind of the thing I hear from everybody. It's very ambitious. There's a lot of really good things in there. But the real question after that is, how is government going to be able to execute on this, especially with a reduced workforce? You know, like, are you modernizing? What are you doing to ensure that these, you know, big changes can actually get executed well inside of the context of the, you know, modernization of the government today?
Well, you focus on what really matters. It all comes down to execution at the end. I would say when it comes to growth, you know, I'm always reminded the International Monetary Fund is, as predicted, Canada would have the second largest growth after the United States for the next 2 years. So, like I said, when I said we start from a strong base, you know, it's even recognized by international institution. When it comes to execution, I'll give you examples, and there could be many, but the major project office. This, for me, is much needed. I mean, we had a number of funds calling, and they say, okay, but what are the projects in Canada? How can we support this infrastructure that you're going to build in Canada, the projects that are going to come? And I think the major project office, we say one project, one review. These kind of things are really going to help to really streamline, because what we need to provide, and what I hear all the time from you and the business leader, is predictability. People say, Minister, and you've been in business, Arlene, and they say, whether it's 1 year or 2 years or 3, but as long as we know, and it's clear that we don't need to knock on, I don't know how many doors, and there's one central agency that is going to coordinate, and the focus. You know, I read a book which is interesting. It's always about focus, prioritize, and execute. The focus that it brings on these projects of national interest, I think, is helping also the nation to pay the attention needed to these projects, because they've been identified as projects that will, you know, there's a number of criteria, but that are going to help to build a strong Canada, you know, whether it's in the mining sector, and, you know, we have Agnico Eagle, but think about critical minerals as well, you know. I mean, if you look at the mining jurisdiction in the world, I would think that Canada now, and, you know, there are a number of miners in the room, but Canada is a very attractive jurisdiction. Not only you have a number of credits, but you have the first and last mile fund. We have the strategic fund that we put to make sure that we can support that. And we know the role of critical minerals in the world. I mean, don't need to look too far in the literature. People would say some have been subject to export control. So Canada can become the supplier of choice to all the NATO countries, for example. That's a great place to be. So we just need to look at processes by processes in order to say, how can we improve the process? How can technology be our friend in doing that? I think technology, we have the benefit to live in an era, and I'll go to artificial intelligence, which, you know, could certainly help us to deliver better service, faster service to Canadian. I'll give you one practical example, and I may get a text message after from the mayors, but the mayor of Kelowna and Hamilton, both of them in different ways, have put, for example, their building code on a large language model. So when you apply for a building permit, you interact with an AI system that, you know, the way I understood it, would give you a response very quickly, and then a human would interact to make sure this is all fine. But then you just change the nature of building permits in a sense. You use technology, which is making sure you conform to the building codes, and then you get an answer that will help you to finalize that. If you multiply that example by so many ways, just think about the productivity that you can get at the same time that you have governance. So my role, first of all, is to make sure that these best practices are adopted across the country, or they're known. Bring the level of ambition of Canada. I always say, you know, we need to be ambitious, and, you know, we need to start to brag a bit about Canada. You know, I try to say, let's brag, because in a sense, not everyone in the morning wakes up thinking about Canada. So our collective role is to bring that to the world and say, listen, this is the road we're going to travel together. This is the strength of Canada. This is what we stand for. This is the Canadian values. This is what we can offer on critical mineral. This is what we can offer on nuclear energy. This is what we can offer to in terms of food security. And I'll just finish that I think we live in a world where the nexus between energy security, economic security, and national security is becoming closer than ever. I think people get that. And I could even add food security to that. And so that nexus is really putting Canada on a pedestal, I would say in many ways, because when you put these things together, the world is looking and say, who will be my stable, reliable partner 10, 20, 30 years from now? Obviously today, but also for the long term, and I think Canada stands out.
Sorry. And that's really well said. I think in business we like to, we understand the nexus between strategy and execution, how important it is to execute well. And in the government, it's about moving from policy to practice and making sure that, the practices that government puts in place are actually defending the policy and the intention of it. So here's an audience question for you. How is your industry minister protecting national champions in the critical mineral sector, such as tech, from foreign takeovers?
Well, I'll tell you very simply. You know that when we have the Invest in Canada Act, which calls for a review when you have foreign companies who want to take Canadian companies. There's a national security review in all cases, and there's the net benefit test for transaction of a certain level. But what I did when I was industry minister is I've added something, and it's interesting. It's almost like if the person who asked the question knew my previous answer to you. But what I did at the time is I added economic security as national security, so that if someone would want to take over one of our critical assets in Canada, whether it's about critical minerals or other assets, we could consider as part of national security, economic security. And that is providing us this opportunity when you look at these investments. Obviously, we're a very open country. We welcome foreign investment. We're a welcoming country in many ways, and we add a lot of foreign direct investment. But at the same time, with this nexus of national security and economic security and critical minerals and critical resources, you have to engage with eyes wide open. And therefore making sure that at the same time that we are very open, that we can protect these assets that would play in terms of economic security and / national security. So we already did that to make sure that the world is changing at a pace that we have not seen in a long time. So what I did that at the time was to say, whatever may come next, at least we have the opportunity to look at that seriously and make the right determination for the interest of Canada.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. I really, like the audience, I genuinely appreciate your passion for our nation, your investment in our nation in terms of trying to do the right things to build this country into the future as strong as we can possibly be. And I really appreciate all of your answers today and your time today. So thank you for joining us.
Merci tout le monde. Let's seize the moment. Let's be ambitious. Merci. Merci tout le monde. Thank you. Merci. Sorry. Merci tout le monde. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. On behalf of TD Bank, I'm Sona Mehta. I have the distinct pleasure of leading the Canadian Personal Retail Bank here in Canada. We're so delighted to support the luncheon today. Thank you, Minister Champagne. Thank you, Arlene, for moderating this conversation. Let me just pause on. I think what you can really feel in this room today is a shared energy. And I think, Sean, you called it out. You brought this passion, this real contagious energy with you from the moment you walked in, Minister Champagne. There is real hope that your government is actively bringing forth the conditions to spur investment and innovation in this country. We know this is certainly the moment where it matters that we all show up collectively together. We appreciate both you and the Prime Minister having made stops here in Toronto to share your vision and your passion and your priorities with business leaders. I think it really matters when government and businesses come together and we show up for each other. We build on our shared strengths, and ultimately the purpose is the betterment of this nation. Investing in our country, our companies, and our communities, it's always been important, but we know today just clearly how high the stakes are. But I reflect on your optimism. We have seen such resilience in Canada this past year. whether it's our individuals, our communities, our businesses. You know, at TD, we have the distinct honor to bank 1 in 3 Canadians. And so every day, we are fueled by our ability to make a difference in the lives of Canadians. You know, we take very seriously when we help someone buy their first new home, or secure their retirement, or back Canadian businesses as they start and they scale and they thrive. We take that incredibly seriously. We know the power that comes with our reach, and we really commit to continue to work together, both ourselves at TD Bank, but all of us in this room, I know I speak for all of you, to help shape a country and an economy that Canadians can count on. So, Minister, in closing, listening to you today, your enthusiasm and your optimism for where the government is leading the country is clear. It seems to be very contagious as I look around the room. So thank you again, Minister Champagne, and thank you to the Canadian Club for hosting these important conversations.